Welcome back to the deep dive. If you or someone you know is really in the thick of caregiving, you
Mm.
get it. There's this constant tension, right, between that deep emotional commitment and just pure operational exhaustion. The whole field is just massive. It's filled with complex research, and it's so easy to feel lost, or, even worse, like you're not being effective. So today, we're cutting right to the core, to the philosophy that really guides successful, sustainable care. We're diving into this powerful framework called behavioral insights for restored care connections. And this isn't just some abstract theory, it's a blueprint. It's designed to take the most robust findings from behavioral science and, translate them directly into actions that restore connection and really cut down on stress. Our mission here is pretty simple. We want to unpack the core principles and show you exactly how these high level behavioral insights are supposed to become compassionate, manageable, day to day successes. So, what are the key nuggets we really need to pull from this?
I think the most immediate takeaway is just their unique focus. It's where they start. Instead of beginning with these, huge, daunting systemic problems, the authors ground their whole philosophy in the tangible, the here and now. They recognize that for caregiving to be sustainable, you need wins that are achievable right now.
Yeah.
And that makes the knowledge so immediate and functional for you, the caregiver, because it validates the importance of what you do every single day, no matter how small it might seem.
That focus on the tangible, that's exactly where the source material kicks off. And it's such a powerful way to reframe what success even means. The declaration is every bath made easier, every moment made calmer, every small win matters. But, why elevate the small win? Like making a bath easier, why put that on a pedestal? Doesn't that risk, I don't know, minimizing the huge systemic and emotional challenges caregivers are facing every day?
Yeah, that's a really critical question. It's so easy to look at a systemic issue, right? Like lack of respite care or financial stress, and then feel like focusing on a small win is, well, trivializing the real problem. But this framework is tackling a different kind of problem. It's about the psychological spiral of failure. I mean, think about it. In chronic or advanced caregiving, where huge milestones like a full recovery might not be on the table, frustration often builds up around those basic, unavoidable daily tasks, dressing, eating, bathing. If those things routinely end in a struggle, in resistance, in emotional distress for both people, the relationship just suffers this massive, compounding negative reinforcement.
So the bath isn't really about hygiene. It's
hmm
it's a metric for the relationship in that specific moment.
Precisely. That's it exactly. By explicitly calling out every bath made easier and every moment made calmer, they are setting up a new, really pragmatic metric for success. Success isn't stopping the disease's progression. Success is achieving tiny, incremental, positive reinforcements during these necessary interactions. If we can apply behavioral science to just reduce those friction points, we start building some positive momentum. And the source confirms this. It's all designed for emotional sustainability. It says the goal is to help the hard days feel a little less overwhelming. They know that if you don't feel like you're winning anything during the day, if every single interaction is a fight, burnout is just. It's inevitable. The small win is the fuel. It's the fuel for the caregiver's endurance.
I really appreciate that distinction. It shifts the whole conversation from just managing the other person's behavior to managing the entire relationship's environment for resilience. But let's push on the how. How does behavioral science actually help make that bath easier? Give me a concrete example.
Great point. Because it's not about just, trying harder. It's about using insight. So,
Yeah.
for instance, a lot of times resistance during a bath isn't really refusal. It's anxiety. It's driven by sensory overload or maybe feeling rushed. A behavioral strategy would be to just force the issue. It would be to introduce specific cues and environmental modifications. So maybe the small win involves sequencing the actions in a very fixed routine and adding a simple, consistent visual cue, like placing the towel in the exact same spot every single time or playing the same quiet music. That consistency reduces novelty, and novelty is a huge anxiety trigger. The goal is friction reduction through deliberate design, turning a 30-minute struggle into a 15-minute routine where cooperation is at least possible. That's a behavioral insight applied at the micro level.
Okay, that makes the connection between the high level philosophy and the, ground level action so much clearer. It's really about leveraging predictability to minimize emotional resistance.
And that clarity leads us right into the strategic framework they promise. The source lays out 3 different types of knowledge that all work together. You have behavioral gerontology insights, compassionate caregiving strategies, and real-world stories. This layering is so crucial. It makes sure the approach isn't just, based on anecdotes or just rigid science.
Hmm.
It forces a balance between the academic and the immediately actionable.
Okay, let's break down those first two because they feel like the engine here. We've got behavioral gerontology insight, so scientific understanding of why behavior is changing, and then the compassionate caregiving strategies, the actual things you do.
Yeah.
What does a gerontology insight actually look like in practice? Give us a really clear example of that.
Okay, let's take a common challenge. Following multi-step instructions. This often fails because of short-term memory impairment, which is really common in many aging conditions. So the insight here, a core behavioral gerontology insight, is that the brain, under certain degenerative conditions, it just loses the capacity for what's called sequential memory processing. It loses it fast. So asking someone to take off your shirt, then put your arms up, then step into the tub, that's just overloading the system. The behavior you see, the resistance, it isn't defiance, it's system failure.
Right. Okay, so that's the why. Now, what's the corresponding compassionate caregiving strategy? How do we apply that insight?
So the strategy is something called chunking and visual cueing. Instead of a sequence of verbal demands, you break the task into these little discrete one-step chunks, and you use nonverbal cues. So for example, instead of saying, let's get your shoes and socks off, you might just point to the shoes while handing them a part of the shoe to hold. Then you wait. You wait for that one step to be completed before you even introduce the next one. This approach respects the cognitive limitation, that's the insight, while deploying a really effective technique, that's the strategy. It shows that the solution is always an empathetic response that's rooted in science. It balances that data-driven reality with, just kindness.
That distinction is so incredibly important. It elevates the role of the caregiver from just being reactive, yelling or repeating instructions, to being a proactive, applied behavioral scientist. You're actually designing the environment to bypass the impairment.
Exactly. And that brings us to the third vital component, the real-world stories. Because strategy guides and clinical data, no matter how brilliant they are, they often fall flat when a caregiver is sitting there, totally exhausted at 3 in the morning. The stories are the bridge.
It's community. It provides community. When you're feeling isolated and overwhelmed by some unique, frustrating interaction, the story acts as emotional proof. It says, hey, someone else dealt with this exact frustration, that specific resistance during teeth brushing, and here is how they use this behavioral insight to find a way through it.
The stories are just essential emotional fuel. They translate these abstract concepts like chunking into something that feels achievable. They move the strategy from, this is a good idea, to, this is a technique that actually worked for a person just like me dealing with the same reality. The stories are just necessary for validation, for motivation, for making sure the caregiver feels seen and supported.
And this all flows into the specific mechanism for success. After they establish the philosophy, the small wins, and the framework, the insights and strategies, the authors detail how these changes build on each other. It's one supportive routine, one predictable moment, one restored connection at a time. This idea of a restored connection is so key here. It implies the connection was lost because of something environmental. And the solution isn't passion or some big emotional gesture. It's structure. It's supportive routine and predictable moment. It really, really suggests that chaos and unpredictability are the main villains in this story.
That is absolutely the core thesis here. Yes, if the goal is that moment made calmer or the bath made easier, then the antagonist is surprise and the stress that comes from it. Unpredictability is a massive driver of agitation and anxiety for the person receiving care, and it is the primary driver of panic and inadequacy for the caregiver. The routine provides the structure, the established rhythm of when and where things happen, but predictability provides the emotional guarantee, the assurance of how things are going to unfold step by step, using those supportive cues we were just talking about.
So the supportive routine isn't about rigid control. It's more like a scaffolding built for comfort.
Precisely. For the care recipient, a supportive routine minimizes their cognitive load. They don't have to use effortful planning or memory. The environment just tells them what's next. And for the caregiver, this consistency reduces the need for that constant moment-to-moment crisis management. It allows them to conserve their own emotional resources. Connection gets restored because both people can actually relax to the flow of the activity instead of bracing for a conflict.
And crucially, the source connects this microaction, this single supportive routine, to this monumental macro goal. They state, together we're changing how the world sees aging.
This is their ultimate vision, and it's so powerful because it links your personal action to societal change. According to this philosophy, you don't change the world's view of aging through, abstract advocacy alone. You do it by ensuring that the lived reality of aging, one predictable moment at a time, is dignified and calm and connected. The revolution starts in the home. It starts in that easier bath. If these behavioral insights can reliably and consistently restore connection in millions of these tiny microinteractions, then that negative, fear-driven perception of aging as just a state of constant conflict and dependency, it has to change. By necessity, it changes.
It democratizes that global mission. You don't need a huge platform. You just need to implement predictability and kindness in your routine today. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the philosophy of restored care connections, we've really boiled this framework down to three core tenets for you. First, the only sustainable metric for success is the small win. That calmer moment, the easier interaction. That's what reduces friction and prevents burnout. Second, a sustainable strategy requires balancing the academic insights, so knowing why the behavior is happening, with compassionate, specific strategies, knowing what to do, and then the motivational fuel of real world stories. And finally, the mechanism for all this change is the deliberate design of the environment. It's built through supportive routines and predictable moments. Consistency is the foundation that trust and connection are rebuilt on.
And that raises an important question for you to consider. If predictability and supportive routines are the keys to restoring connection, why did the connection need restoration in the first place? Does this behavioral framework inherently suggest that many of our modern high-stress care environments, whether they're in an institution or at home, often fail not because of a lack of care, but because they are structurally chaotic or rushed or just fundamentally unpredictable? I think that thought should guide how you evaluate and maybe modify your own care structures moving forward.